So in previous lessons we were focusing mainly on the concept of classical liberalism, the liberalism of John Locke, John Stuart Mill, and others, and other thinkers. Well, in this lesson, what we're going to do is going to move away from classical liberalism and the values of classical liberalism, and look at more modern themes in liberalism, and look at more modern thinkers. And we're going to begin by looking at the concept of positive freedom. Now, as we know, in the framework for classical liberalism, there was an emphasis placed on negative freedom, on the concept of negative freedom. Well, in more modern liberal regimes, we can see that there is a shift towards more of a positive freedom aspect, and this coincides with a shift away from the concept of egotistical individualism. Don't forget, egotistical individualism is the concept that individuals and people have a natural desire to seek out their own egotistical ends and their own virtues. But this shift went from egotistical individualism towards a more what we call developmental individualism. And so this was a shift away from the concept that people have the freedom to seek their own individual goals, but they should rather focus on their own personal growth. And this is what really developmental individualism means. So this is a focus on individual personal growth. Okay, and with this has some concepts and some side effects for the concept of negative freedom. So the philosopher Thomas Hill Green argued that in respect of the ideas of poverty and inequality within society, it should be tackled to, quote, maintain the conditions without which a free exercise of human faculties is impossible. So it's talking about the idea of individualism being hampered and being restricted by the existence of poverty and inequality within society. So, for example, if somebody wanted a university degree and it cost thousands and thousands of pounds, that would be almost impossible, or at least very, very difficult for somebody who lives in poverty, because they would not have the economic ability to seek out this individual goal that they want to achieve. And so we should see a tackling of poverty and inequality in this way, and we will talk about that in a minute when we talk about the welfare state. So freedom should be described less as an absence from restraint, but more as a positive thing. Okay, a freedom to rather than a freedom from, as Isaiah Berlin remarked. So it wasn't just enough anymore that we can only have negative freedom, where all we have is a freedom from different things, totalitarianism, etc., and all these restrictive elements on people's lives. But no, it has to be also a freedom to do something, as well as a freedom from things being done towards others. And this brings into question the idea of the welfare state in a modern liberal idea. So with this shift in individualism came a shift in the role of the state, in the ways in which we can utilize the state to achieve the liberal ideas. So to protect freedom and individualism, okay, people believed in the modern liberal sense that the state should be extended. An extension of the state can actually bring about these kinds of ideals. So as such, a welfare state, now we understand what a welfare state is, the provision of welfare to provided by the state. So these include things like education. They can include things like housing, okay? They can include things like just general capital, and further, and medical treatment. So these kinds of things within the welfare state, we can justify their existence, okay, by saying that all of these things here, if we can provide if the state can provide education and housing and capital to those who are less fortunate, we can bring about greater equality of opportunity. Because in a, if we didn't have a welfare state, for example, and let's take the example of education, and everybody had to pay for their university degrees outright, and they had to pay the thousands of pounds that it would cost, then those who are less fortunate within society wouldn't be able to achieve the same kind of goals. They wouldn't have the same kind of opportunities as people who were richer and who had more money. As such, we can introduce the state to make a provision when it comes to the welfare state, where it provides financial support for people wanting to go to university. And as such, even those who are less fortunate have the opportunity to achieve the same things as people who are more fortunate. That is how we can justify a welfare state within this new modern liberal regime. And this is supported further by John Maynard Keynes, who was an economist, who argued that the state would need to intervene in the economy to ensure an equality of opportunity. Okay, so we see here in the modern liberal sense a shift away from the free market ideals. Okay, and we will talk about the extent to which this free market shift away from free market and away from a capping of restraints on the economy. We'll see how this shift has changed and also brought about almost a bit of a fracture between the sort of modern liberals and the concept of neoliberalism in the next lesson. But the idea of the free market, the Adam Smith, David Ricardo concepts of free market economics and free market capitalism, these things can provide can account for some kinds of inequalities, and so therefore the state could intervene to almost balance things out. And this is what the welfare state would be. So a very good example of where this would exist would be in the concept of provision of capital. If we were to redistribute wealth to those who are less fortunate, then this is going to provide for greater equality of opportunity. This is what the modern liberal understanding is. We also have the concept of social liberalism. So modern liberals argue that society has discriminated against those of certain minorities. I mean, this is true. So this is just objectively the case. Objectively true. Okay. And as such, there should be a need to push for what we would describe as positive discrimination. And that may be necessary to achieve true equality. This can exist in a number of forms, things like affirmative action programs. Okay, so affirmative action, whereby we have these minorities within society that are discriminated in a positive sense. People are discriminated in favour of these minorities to try and balance out the system. The final thing I want to talk about is one of the key major philosophers within modern liberalism, probably one of the most fundamental modern liberal thinkers, and this is John Rawls. So John Rawls, in his book Theory of Justice and in his subsequent work I believe it's called Political Liberalism. Hang on. Yes, it's called Political Liberalism. I just checked my shelf. Okay. What Rawls did was develop a concept known as the original position. And this was a thought experiment. So he would ask us to imagine what he would describe as the original position. Okay. And he's asking people to construct a society that they would like to live in their imagination. They want to construct an equal society in where everybody would like to live. The next step is these people then be put under a veil of ignorance. And this veil of ignorance would mean that nobody would know whereabouts in this society people would be placed. Will people be placed in the upper classes, lower classes, middle classes, or it doesn't really matter. People don't know. Okay? And what Rawls argues is, if we have these two aspects, we have this original position, we have people in this veil of ignorance where people won't know whereabouts in society they would exist, then if we were to then ask how the society would want to be, how people would want this society to be like, they would say that they would want it to be a socio-economically equal society. It would be socially equal and economically equal. because people don't know whereabouts they're going to end up in the society, so they would want it to be equal to ensure that everybody has the kind of equal opportunities. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of a more of a deep dive into Rawls's position, because Rawls then goes on to argue for things like redistributive justice and foundational equality and all these different things. So we'll go do a video specifically on John Rawls, because his philosophy really has changed the ways in which liberalism is practiced in the world today. And I might whip out some of the original texts and bring about some quotes, so we can have a deeper understanding, a deeper exegesis of Rawls's philosophy.